Hey, I'm Mark,
And I'm Craig.
and this is Songwriter's Tales. And Craig, today, part two of an amazing conversation with Alan Shacklock. Tell the folks who Alan Shacklock is if they don't know.
Alan Shacklock. Well, if you don't know, that means you've missed part one.
Right,
So go back
right.
and watch part one. A record producer, recording engineer, arranger, songwriter, instrumentalist. Some of the people he's worked with: Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, The Who, Toto, Chicago, Pretenders, Sir Paul McCartney, John Mayer, Queen, The Police. Did I mention Jeff Beck?
Oh my gosh. Well, all of my heroes, you just basically listed all of my heroes. So,
And don't forget, you're going to hear Alan on Sugar Ray's big hit.
and oh man, let's do it.
And then there's a great story here if you want to hear this one. I don't know, edit it if you want to. But I did eventually go to the Royal Academy of Music then and started doing it. I was in the band for a little while I was at the academy. I couldn't stay in the band because it was too much work at the college. I think it's going to date me. I was about 19. I was in my, I guess you would call sophomore year. And I used to like hanging out with the jazz players at the Royal Academy because they were all the cool guys, and everything.
Mhm.
And anyway, we used to go to this pub down the road from the college in Baker Street in London, and then we went there one Friday night, and John Bonham was sitting there, and he went, "Alan, how you doing, man?" I went, "Okay, great. How are you?" He said, "Yeah, great." When he was with Chris Farlow, with me for the last few months, he said, "I'm forming a group with Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones." And I said, "John, that's never going to happen. You know that. They're playing on every session in that those guys played on every 60s record, all the Dusty Springfield stuff, all the real cool. Jimmy Page was on Donovan,
Number one
Caesar
call.
the Witch, incredible. They were the call.
Mhm.
Because they could, and Jimmy would get booked. And I said, they're never going to do that. They're making so much money in sessions. He said, "Oh, we're doing it. We're doing it." He said, "We've got this singer called Terry Reid." Now, reverently. And I went, "Okay, well," and then I saw him a year later in that pub. And I said, "So did you ever form the group?" He said, "Oh yeah, we've already been to New York and played." So I said, "So Terry is the singer?" He said, "No, Terry couldn't do it. He'd signed a record deal and was doing a tour in the States under his own name." And he said, we've got this kid called Robert Plant from Birmingham, from the Band of Joy."
Mm.
And I said, "Okay." I said, "So what?" He said, "Yeah, we're on TV next week." And they were on a show called the Russell Harty Show in England, which was like your Tonight Show,
Mhm.
like it would be a Letterman, if
Mhm.
Yeah.
anybody remembers that,
Sure.
or before that was Johnny Carson, of course. That
Mhm.
kind of thing. They were on, and they came on and played Good Times, Bad Times,
My Lord.
and changed the face of
Music.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway, this is just the '60s. I don't know when.
Well, here I'm gonna interject something, Mark. We're gonna have Alan come back just to get,
we could do a
get
show for
into
every decade, probably.
yeah.
get into the next decade. Yeah, that's what's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Well, on
Um,
the intro, which you didn't hear, I will have mentioned all the things that you've done. So Mark and
okay.
I already knew at the time. We said there's not enough days in the hour to do this, but we want you to continue.
There's been, it's really been sort of almost 6 decades, really,
It's amazing.
if we're looking at it. And then, of course, do you want to go into the 70s now?
I don't see why not, because we're going to be.
Have we got time?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, we're going to just keep going. Because I think this is going to take you into Babe Ruth at this point, right?
Yeah, there's always a story.
Yeah.
At the end of the academy, I started to compose songs, just for yucks, like, because I thought, okay, and then I formed a group to try out the material, really, just to rehearse and see what happened. We were rehearsing in a place in London, in a basement in a building. At the top of that building, there was an artist, a painter artist called Roger Dean. Roger Dean, your listeners may know, did all of the Yes covers, the sleeves. If you take a look at them, this is incredible.
Other works of art. Yeah.
This man is a genius. And he came down and listened to the band, and he said, "You guys are good." And I said, "Well, thanks." And he said, you should try and get a record deal. And I said, "Well, I don't really know how to do that." But he said, "I'm working for a couple of record companies already, just doing artwork." He said, "I could introduce you." So he ended up introducing us to Harvest Records. Some of your listeners may know that Harvest, you may not know the name, but we're back on EMI again, which is Harvest was an imprint of EMI Records. And you might know, some of the listeners might know ELO, and moreover, the Pink Floyd.
Wow.
Were on Harvest. So we said, yeah, so anyway, we somehow got a gig at the famous Marquee Club, opening for somebody, and Roger Dean said, here's 15, the old school. This is the old school. There's no internet at this point. There's no cell phones. There's no iPhones. Your listeners have to know this. There's old school phones. And so what we call landlines. So sorry, brain moment, senior
Marquee.
moment.
You're at the Marquee.
We're going to get the Marquee. So I invited 15 record companies. He gave me all these numbers. This is true, absolute true. And one showed up only. Now that one didn't phone us for 3 months, something like that. And we thought, oh, well, that was a dead duck. No, but he was there, this gentleman called Nick Mobbs, who was the A&R manager at Harvest. For Pink Floyd, for ELO, for Roy Wood's Wizard, for Roy Harper, all those artists. So I remember I was with my parents at the time, of course, and there was a little note by the phone. I'd come home from a gig, and my mother had written me a note saying, "You've had a call from EMI. Mr. Nick Mobbs called you. Is that important?"
Possibly.
So I said, "Probably yes." So I phoned him and he said, "Can you come in for a meeting on Monday? We want to sign a group."
Wow.
Now there was 4 guys
Wow.
in the group. There were 4 guys in the group at that time. And of course, some of you listeners may know, of course, we ended up with a girl singer in Babe Ruth. How did we end up with the name Babe Ruth is your next question.
That would be it.
We didn't know. We didn't know. Embarrassingly, we're really sorry. We didn't know who Babe Ruth was. We were British, so we had no idea who the legend baseball player.
Yeah, you're excused. That's all right.
Our girl singer, Janita, had spent her high school years in San Francisco, actually, that area, the Bay Area. So she definitely knew who that was. And we had an American manager And literally on the day of signing the contract, we didn't have a name. They were going to call it Shacklock, but modesty forbade. I said, I don't want to carry that weight. You know, even though I was the main composer, and guitar player, whatever, and lead singer at that time before we got Jenny. So we signed on the day, and the American manager guy said, I've got a great name for a group. It's Babe Ruth. I said, I don't know what it is, put it down. And that's exactly what happened. And then we went on to make 3 albums because at the time EMI owned Abbey Road Studios. You may know from the Beatles' legendary days. We were grandfathered into Abbey Road Studios to make the first albums.
Mm.
And, you know, of course, just completely starstruck. I mean, just going, what? You know, now I'd done some sessions in my teens in there. So I was not an old hand, but I knew it. So, you know, it was that. And in fact, you may know a gentleman called Alan Parsons. Of the Alan Parsons Project, who also recorded a lot of the Pink Floyd. Also, he was on the Beatles recordings before us. He was my first assistant. I never let him forget it.
That is awesome.
He's very nice about it. He's been up to Nashville and we've got together a couple of times, and I keep in touch. Big name drop, but pick it up.
Well, I will say, Mark, Alan had I don't remember when this was, Alan, but you invited me. You said Alan Parsons is going to be in town. We're doing a seminar, and
that's
I
right,
can't
yeah.
remember what you were calling it. You were calling like the 2 Allens or Alan and Alan or something. You had
I can't remember.
Yeah, you had a funny name,
This.
but I actually got to go spend the afternoon with Alan and Alan and listen to those great stories. And
it's a bit later on. Yeah. Oh, well, he was on the roof when the Beatles played on Apple.
Nice
Apple.
guy too.
He was. Oh, he's a diamond.
Yeah.
I'm very proud to say he's been a dear friend since then. You know. But anyway, so all that to say, that we made 3 records, and I just absolutely loved the recording studio. I couldn't get enough of it. You know, I'd go in at 10 in the morning and not come out to 2 the next morning, sleep, and then go back again. You know, which we were all studio rats. You know, especially in there because it was such a legendary.
Oh yeah.
Place where the Beatles had recorded, and moreover, more importantly for you listeners, you need to study this. The Shadows.
The Shadows
recorded their everything in there. They had an engineer called Malcolm Addy, who was another genius. He would record their stuff, and it was pristine, beautiful recordings. And of course, they remember now. You Pro Tools people who have got how many tracks now? 1,000, is it?
Something just shy of it.
They had three tracks.
3 tracks. That's right.
America was always ahead of England in the technology because of, reverently, I would say, and respectfully, is Tom Dowd. Tom Dowd was a brilliant audio guy. He was a tech guy. Study Tom Dowd. He's fantastic. He was also a accomplished musician. His mother was a opera singer in the Met. But he was one of the guys who would come to England and embarrass us, with people like Jeff Emerick with the Beatles, going, "Why are you only using 4 tracks? We've got 8."
Oh my gosh!
So
man.
we'd go, "Oh, okay. How do you do that?" And he goes, "Well, you do it like this," because he was the tech guy.
Yeah.
Wow.
That
he knew.
I need to interject here. So right now we're talking about you being in the studio, and we'd gone from Babe Ruth, and we're going to swing back toward that because we want to talk about the Mexican and the sampling that's been done with that. So we will come back to that.
Gosh.
But right now, when you're talking about engineering in the studio, one of the first stories, I don't even remember who introduced us, you and me, Alan, but one of the things that they said was, Alan Shacklock is the guy that when Roger Daltrey did the record Under the Raging Moon about Keith Moon after Keith Moon had passed, and there was a compilation of drummers from all over the world, from what I understand.
Oh yeah. This is
that
80s now.
they did a solo on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
record. Now, for those that are listening, we're going back not only to landlines, but we're going back to non-digital anything. There was no such
So
thing. It was all analog tape.
all on 2-inch analog tape. Yeah.
And so they had that tape got sent around. Would you tell the story? Because I'll probably say something that's not true, but
Well,
this is my first story of you.
Yeah. The story was this. I had produced, some of you listeners may know, may not, a Meatloaf record. And it was called Bad Attitude. It was his fourth album. And he wanted to record in England. When I met Meatloaf he was in London. He phoned me at home. I thought someone was playing a joke. And he went, "Hey, it's Meatloaf. You know, I want you to come to London." Sorry, a bad impression. All respect, all due respect. With every respect. So I went and met. We got on like a house on fire, and I said, "Just let me work on it, and we can start." So we started in Stamford, Connecticut, with the band, and started getting all the writers together, and then moved the whole shebang to England. All right, coming to the Daltrey. There was a song on the Meatloaf record that was called Bad Attitude, which was basically a father and son kind of exchange. And Meatloaf said to me, "Who should we get to be the father?" So I said, "Well, first person comes to my mind is Roger Daltrey." And he went, "What? The Who?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "He's fantastic." He said, "Do you think you'd do it?" And I said, "Well, let's try." So I did the legwork, called everybody, and eventually spoke to Roger. And he said, "Yeah, if I like the song, I'll come to Abbey Road on the Monday and do a duet." So that's how that happened. All right. So your question, Craig, I'll be quick because I tend to go on.
It's all good.
What on the session, Roger and I got on really well, and I said, "Did you ever remember?" This was in '84. I said, "Do you ever remember in '74?" It's going to date me. We opened for the Who in Babe Ruth. In London, we opened 4 nights for them in quite a smaller venue, only about 2,000 kids. But anyway, he said, "Oh yeah, you were the girl singer." And I said, "Yeah." So anyway, we started talking, and I said to Roger, "Don't you ever record anymore, yourself?" He said, "Well, we did a few albums." But I said, "Well, if you ever, I just threw my hat in the ring, as I say." And on the Saturday, he said, "Let's do it. I'll make an album with you." And he said, "I want to do a celebration of the Who."
Wow.
And he said, all of the lyrics on the album should be pertaining to that. I said, "That sounds like beautiful to me," because I was a big fan of the Who. I used to go watch the Who when I was 13 and 14.
Yeah.
So anyway, to come to the story, I had gone to John Parr. I don't know whether your listeners would know St. Elmo's Fire. John was a fantastic writer, and I knew him through the industry. And I called John. I said, "Would you write a song for the album?" And he said, "Oh yeah, great. Love to." So he ended up coming in with the song called Under a Raging Moon, which was all about Keith Moon. And it was actually about the story of the Who on Woodstock, when they played Woodstock. Okay, so if you listen to the lyrics, if you've a mind, if the listeners want to do that, you'll see that it's the whole story, in the searchlights and everything. It starts off, getting chills now. So Mark Brzezicki, who is probably one of my dearest and best friends, plays drums for a group at that time called Big Country. You may know In a Big Country, legendary, just fantastic. And I'd invited Mark on to play the whole record. He was going to be drumming on the whole record. And then I said, Mark's the nicest, most humble guy, one of the best drummers you'll ever see. He's played for Sting, he's played for Eric Clapton, he's played for, I don't know, everybody, Procol Harum. You'll never get a resume like this. He's just incredible. Anyway, we've been best friends ever since then to now, even to now. So I said, all right, Mark, I said, look, this is a song about Keith Moon, so you've got to do a drum solo. And he went, oh, I don't want to do a long drum solo. I said, you have to do a drum solo. And he said, oh, well, anyway, he said, look, I'll do, maybe 16 bars for you musicians who know that, And I said, yeah, okay, whatever. And he said, look, we were in a studio in London called RAK, R-A-K Studios. Beautiful studio. Who's been there? U2, Adele. And we were in RAK. And it's got several studios. In the other room in RAK, some of you listeners may know the Pretenders. So Martin Chambers of the Pretenders was the drummer, and Mark knew Martin. So he said, I wonder if Martin would be interested. He said, all of his drums are set up in the other studio. So I said, well, so he introduced me to Mark, and I said, to Martin, excuse me. Mark's introducing me to Martin. And then Martin said, yeah. He said, I'd love to do that. And so I literally took our tape off our reel and took it in there, put it on their reel, and he did a drum solo. Came out, great solo, 16 bar. And they said, look, why don't you call Stuart? They both knew Stuart. And I went, Stuart? They went, Stuart Copeland. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. They said, no. They dialed the old phone, as you do. Stuart, this is Alan Stewart. I said, do you want to play on this? He went, oh, yeah, man. He said, great. He said, I've just finished a polo match with Prince Charles. He said, but come down to my barn. Come down to my barn. I did this. So I took the tape, drove to his barn where he's got his stuff set up, and he did 3 solos. Right. Next thing I know, right, we're back in studio. We get a call from the Queen office. So Roger Taylor wants to come and play on this. He's heard that this is a drama record. So I said, great. Yeah. So he came up in a Bentley, had his roadie bring his kit, and he did a solo. Then it snowballed. I called Carl Palmer, my dear old friend, right, from I said, listen, this is happening. We've got 4 guys already. He said, oh, yeah, I'll come down. He said, so the whole Emerson, Lake and Palmer truck shows up outside the studio, and they unload his drums. He comes in and does the solo. Then we reverently knew that Cozy Powell, you may know from Black Sabbath, was our dear friend. He's passed on. He's a brilliant drummer. And Cozy came in and played. He froze. He said, I don't know what to do. He said, I don't know what to do. I said, all right. I said, look, imagine Keith Moon's watching you. And then he just blitzed this amazing drum solo. Everything. It's fantastic. I said, there you go. Thank you. And at the time, Keith Moon had given the young Zach Starkey, who is Ringo's son, his first drum kit and pedal. He'd given him a drum pedal and started him off. Keith Moon was a coach for him. So I said, well, we're going to have to call Zach. So we called Zach, and he came in 20 years old, came in and blitzed it. Amazing. Now, I'm probably leaving someone out because there was 7 and Mark's on it. And who did we leave?
How many was that, Mark?
I don't know, but I'm just like,
Yeah, this is incredible. And then Zach came in and played, and Zach and Mark did the last solo together, playing two drum kits. So it was definitely an honoring for Keith Moon.
Hey everybody, Craig with Songwriter's Tales with Mark and Craig. Just wanted to let you know episodes 25 and 26 are now out on YouTube and Spotify. You're going to want to check these out. This is Jamie O'Neill, a singer and a songwriter from Nashville who has had hits, and she's got a brand new album out. Check her out. Episodes 25 and 26.